Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Perception Paradox. My name is Zivile, and today we're diving into startup ecosystems. So how do we build ecosystems that truly matters? In a world where innovation is constant and connection is paramount, it can be difficult. And today I'm joined by Christopher Locke, who is head of program at South Summit, which is a startup event happening all over the world. We were touring right now Europe in smaller community events. I did see that they were in Oslo, in Brussels. We are going very soon in April, which is like in a week or two, to Brazil. And their main event, I would say, is happening in Madrid. It originated in 2012. And right now it gathers around 20,000 people, top tier speakers, big names, great conversations, and even greater experiences. I can't wait because I'm going to experience myself my first South Summit this year. So I'm really excited. And together with Christopher, we explore in this episode the evolving landscape of startups, the future of tech events, and how to create experiences that drive both economic growth and positive impact. So enjoy, guys. You're up for a treat. And let's dive in. Real people, real stories, and real challenges that break the status quo. I'm your host, Zivile, and welcome to Perception Paradox. Christopher, welcome to Perception Paradox.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here. And as usual, I always enjoy our conversations a lot. So doing this on your platform is just amazing.
This is great. I'm really glad that we made it to happen before all the buzz with your big events coming up. And you've just mentioned that you've just returned from Oslo, and Oslo is now getting into the list of one of your favorite cities.
Yeah, we were in Oslo last week. We had a small event we hosted there for scale ups. I'd never been to Oslo before. I had heard Oslo was freezing, minus 20 degrees. It's snow, it's cloudy all the time. Everyone's like, big, serious Vikings. And my experience was completely like everyone was so friendly. The weather was sunny. It was actually sunny in Oslo while it was raining in Madrid. So that was just like the world is upside down. But it was an amazing experience. We met amazing founders, amazing investors, people that are working on technologies, and energy, maritime, and like ocean stuff. Really, really cool stuff. And we also got to experience a bit of the city. We tried the hot saunas they have in front of the Opera House, which basically they give you 90 minutes. You get to go into a sauna, then jump into the freezing cold fjord waters, and then back into a sauna, do that for like 4 or 5 times. And I mentioned this right before we went into this, but it was like I was reborn in the Arctic fjord of Oslo. So it definitely went up on my ranking of European cities. I want to go back soon. So yeah, that was a very nice experience.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Well, you look fresh and you look really energized. So I'm glad to hear that. And it's very Nordic Baltic thing, the saunas, and you should try. Have you ever tried it in winter?
No, I heard there's this thing that happens when you're at these saunas. You have a sauna conversation. So
Mm-hmm.
people, I don't know if you've been to one of these before, but people go into the sauna, you're sitting there, beautiful scenery, everyone's silent, and someone will open a conversation like, where are you from? Like, oh, we're from Madrid. Oh, and the conversation, suddenly everyone in the sauna, which is supposed to be silent, is having this conversation. And one of the couples that was there, they mentioned that they lived there and they went in January when it's actually minus 20 degrees and there's ice and floating ice on the water. And you do the same experience, just colder. I'm like, I'd really like to try that.
It's really
I
epic
think it would be
experience.
yeah, I think it would be. I feel like the word is like life-threatening. Like I feel you'd go in and like if you're not moving, you just freeze there and become an iceberg. But I think it would be very very fun to try that experience in full freezing cold winter.
I'm glad to guide you through this experience. It's one of my favorite things. If I'm, let's say, in the cold environments in Europe, and if it's winter, the sauna, the cold bathing, and cold dipping, it's just the best. And you actually can regulate your temperature with the breath, right? So it's not really that
Yeah.
shocking for your body. But
Also, so
yeah,
there's techniques to do this properly.
you don't just jump in. That's really not good for your
Okay, so we were the
whole
tourists there.
system.
We were, bombing into the water.
That's fun. I'm pretty sure you had good fun. I'm glad to
Yeah.
hear that. But that's cool. So, look, Christopher, today we gathered here to explore the conversations. I think, first of all, you're a person who've done so many multiple things within the startup scene. You had so many different hats, from founder hat to consultancy to programs to, I don't know, all the different ones. Would be great to hear actually your journey through those 360 degrees of, I would call it experience startups. What brought you to Europe and South Summit, to your latest destination?
Yeah, well, okay, so yeah, I've worn many hats, like you were saying. I've been an entrepreneur for 10 years in the past. I've been working in design and product design, industrial design, and digital transformations and projects. This is before my company. I've lived, as you were mentioning, I've lived in Latin America, in the US, in the Caribbean, and I moved 5 years ago here to Madrid with my wife. Basically, we're at that time a bit fed up with we used to live in Buenos Aires in Argentina, and a bit fed up with the chaos and uncertainty and instability of the country at that time. And we both have our roots, our family roots are actually European. So on my side it's Spanish, on her side it's Italian. We're like, hey, what if we move to Europe or the US? And we would explore different options. We actually had a trip here to sort of see if we liked. We went through several European cities. We didn't try Oslo. That might have changed our destination. But we came to Madrid. We fell in love with the city, the people, the food, and it felt close to.
Hmm.
Across different industries, from retail to product to marketing communications and brands. We did all kinds of design. We took a design approach to different challenges that companies would have in their business, either growth, go to market, build a new interactive experience. Some of the highlights, maybe just to give some examples,
Hmm.
is we worked a lot with Nike in their interactive retail experiences at their retail stores in Argentina and in Chile as well, in several countries of Latin America. And we would go end to end from the idea to build the tech, to set it up in their retail, to build the whole digital interfaces. So these were experiences where maybe you'd be running inside the store testing a shoe, and you'd feel like you were running in a park or in New York, and it would give you different statistics of the technology you were using, the
Yeah.
shoes you were testing. We did all kinds of different things, from digital transformation to innovation projects. And that brought me to Europe originally, also to see, hey, let's go into European markets, see what's happening here. We already had clients in the US, and we had a few clients here in Europe. And that sort of gave me my first taste into the European startup ecosystem, which was very, very fun. And then a few years later, being here in Madrid, I discovered South Summit, and
Mm.
I started coming to these events. And this is like, yeah, this is where I need to be. I'm meeting startups, I'm meeting investors, I'm meeting ecosystem operators. And I started meeting some of the people that worked at South Summit. And basically, a few years, months later, that turned into a proposal to join them. And I'm super happy. For those of you that are seeing this on the other side, I'm the global head of program. So I lead stage content, speakers, and basically the whole narrative and conceptual experience for each of our events here in Madrid, the one we do in Brazil, and the one we did last year as well in Korea. So this is for all our events. So that transition, I think, sort of follows my personal urge to help, to create impact, to create value, which led me originally to build my company. And I want to create more value than just being a small piece at someone else's company. We scaled that company for 10 years, came to a point where my business partner and myself, we were in different directions, going different ways. And we peacefully said, okay, let's exit our company. Let's end it where we are. I joined South Summit. And now that this was an opportunity as well to get more involved in the ecosystem, to create value at a different scale, and to help something we had been already doing in our service company, but to help other companies, other people connect and create value at a scale that was impossible to do from a service company. So in that sense, I'm very happy with what I'm doing today. I have my tentacles in
Hmm.
the local ecosystem and the global ecosystem. And I feel that's also very exciting because I get to meet people like you. I get to meet founders. I get to meet very inspiring people, learn about what's happening, and also in a way with our conversations, with the sessions we do, with the concepts, with the different content tracks we set up for each of these events. In a way, you do have an influence into, these 20,000 people come to our event and they live with that narrative that you started putting together, these conversations that you curated, and you can sort of elevate conversations that we feel are important, that we feel are valuable, that we feel have purpose, and at the same time sort of guide these conversations in a way that they are enriching, and they sort of engage as well with their audiences. I rambled a little bit there, but
No, but
I
that was
think
so cool. It gives such a great picture of to understand better where you're coming from and how actually international and global your experience is. And talking about this whole role you are leading right now, it's important to be outside your box, outside your cultural patterns. And it seems like you've been preparing for it for so many different on so many different levels.
yeah, absolutely. I think we talked about this with you a couple weeks back, but it's almost feels like this is where I am supposed to be right now in a way. But everything I've done in my personal experience, originally as an industrial designer, then going as design director, then building my own company, scaling it internationally, working with startups from the other side, but also at the same time being a founder myself, places me today in a place, in a position where I can actually resonate and understand what a startup founder, what an entrepreneur, what their challenges are, what the opportunities are, but from the perspective of the ecosystem, from the
Mhm.
perspective of what's happening and how different things. I like to think in a way what we do at South Summit, or what we do from the content team, is sort of we're the connective tissue in a way of the ecosystem and what happens. And I think that's an exciting place to be as well, to help facilitate things to happen.
100%. And talking about the startup ecosystem, right? So during the last decade and especially last few years, there were major changes, and we always had this huge focus on the Silicon Valley, which is kind of a traditional center innovation hub. But at the same time, we experience the kind of a bit of a decentralization and shift from all those traditional centers to more emerging ecosystems. Like I even heard this saying, right? The new Palo Alto in Europe. And it's
Yeah.
not only about Europe, but also in smaller countries. Everyone is building their own science centers and hubs and so much focus on that. So, how have you experienced so far this whole change? Where are we going with it?
This is a great question. I actually had a conversation yesterday with a colleague. He lives in Brussels and he was just in San Francisco a couple weeks back. And I had a very similar question. I'm like, how is, I haven't been to Silicon Valley, I haven't been to San Francisco, but there's a lot of mystique and like, yeah, if you build a startup in Silicon Valley in this like hotspot, you're going to be successful. And something he said really resonated, which is, you have this idea, this picture that if any company there is, a glorified, it's going to be a unicorn. But he's like, but if you start naming them, like what companies do you know that came out of there that are actually these super successful companies? And they're not in the hundreds game, they're maybe in the dozens game, sort of scale. And he's like, actually, you meet several companies and they're going through the same struggles of companies that you see in Europe or in Latin America, obviously different contexts, but they're struggling with scaling, they're struggling with raising funds. So I think there's a bit of a demystification of Silicon Valley, and as well, talking about distribution, I think we're witnessing a decentralization of innovation like we've never seen before, in a way that I feel Silicon Valley today has become obviously a big node, but in a large distributed network of ecosystems that are
Hmm.
deeply connected, that are deeply interactive. And also, we're seeing much more value in cross pollination as well. So, for example, we were just saying, I lived in Argentina and Buenos Aires, and I came to Madrid. And I've seen firsthand the different maturity of different ecosystems, but also something that I'm seeing a lot now is the complementarity that you have from these different, like the grit from the Argentine entrepreneur or the Latin American entrepreneur coming to Europe, especially Spain, and learning also the strengths of the Spanish ecosystem and the relationship building focus, but also learning how to interact with the greater European, or it's very different. Contexts are different, talents are different, but strength comes in that combination of being able to connect like take advantage of the talents and the advantages or the opportunities you have in different areas. So I think it's that is in one sense, and it's no longer. I think it's no longer about of where you are, but of who you can connect with and how fast you can build. So I think today we're seeing our world is super mega, and we already know this, but DeepSeek, OpenAI, Mistral, everything is happening really fast. Everything's moving forward in very, very fast. And every ecosystem is sort of interacting and responding to these different geopolitical changes, technological changes, which is exciting at one sense, but it's also it's challenging if you're trying to build, and it may be overwhelming if you're a founder and an entrepreneur. You want to build an app, a SaaS. You're like, how am I going to keep up with this? I'm going to build a product. Maybe you'll use AI and you'll do it really fast and then you'll launch it, but then something will happen in China or in the US and Europe, and this is going to change. So I think it's interesting to sort of see that evolution of the startup ecosystems. I think specifically in Europe, I've seen a few cities that are standing out. Obviously, Madrid. I love Madrid. I live here, and it's not because I live here, but I feel it's becoming one of the nodes here in Europe, similar to Lisbon. I think Europe and Madrid and Lisbon share that kind of affinity because I'm seeing lots of Latin American startups, scale-ups, investors that want to come into Europe, and Spain or the peninsula has become sort of the soft landing because of close. Reasons I probably came here, but all these people, and this is sort of the opportunity, they're coming into Europe, but you're used to operate in, if I talk specifically about Argentina, this chaotic sort of survival mode. And you have a lot of talent and grit, but now you're coming into a place that has more stability. It has a better context. And I'm not saying it's perfect context for entrepreneurship, but it's better. So you need to learn how to interact with the local ecosystem and propose things if you're raising funds differently. So I think, and I'm just using those two examples, but obviously Africa as well. Estonia is another hotspot I see. It's also very interesting.
Lithuania.
Lithuania. And just if you look at the greater Europe, that this is happening here as well, where different countries are moving around much more. We just received a couple weeks back, we had a delegation from Poland that came. And it was clean energy and energy transition. And these were all small startups, but they were working on some very, very neat things. And like, wow, this, considering Spain has a lot of percentage of the year with sun, like there's this huge business opportunity here for them to bring technology into a region they don't know. But obviously, and now talking about Europe, there's also challenges between Europe and the fragmentation. And if you want to sort of build a company in Europe, we're very close, but at the same time, it sometimes feels like you're closer from Latin America into Europe than maybe from Estonia or Poland to Spain, for example, because there's a language barrier and cultural differences. I don't know. How do you see it? Do you see it similar? What's been your sort of experience with that?
I think it depends from which angle do you see, but cultural differences for sure. So you always have to tweak from branding to communication messaging. Maybe now it's actually changing because we're getting into this high-paced globalization mode. So I think it's a bit easier to some extent. But if we look in
Yeah,
the current not trend and focus of impact startups, and right now everyone has to solve the actual problem more than before, then we get a lot into the European regulatory systems, right? That actually keeps one thing is to scale and grow because of the cultural challenges. You can actually overcome them quite easily and fast with the local people joining the team and rethinking the approach. But I think what's stopping us is all the regulations. And that's why I
absolutely.
like all the EU acts coming out in public and kind of Europe connecting right now. And hopefully it's going to be easier. That's why US, it's very attractive market, right? Huge continent, one language. It's pretty easy to actually scale everywhere in a way. So that's how I see it. But at the same time, I've noticed that it's becoming easier and easier. As you mentioned, there are no more borders, right? It's
Yeah,
with the current technology and latest innovation, it's more like how smart is the founder to leverage that to their.
yeah, and I think two things that you just mentioned, which is very interesting, and I think on one side, I think that I'm very optimistic about the opportunity in Europe right now, this opportunity of actually like blurring these borders we have, this bureaucracy we have, and I think the geopolitical context is sort of
That doesn't help.
finally helping us like, okay, we actually need to do this. We've talked about it for years and decades probably. And I think there's a very interesting opportunity there if we actually embrace it. from what we're doing, from content, from what we're doing. I'm trying to create conversations around this to also help encourage it. And as we say, we have a role in the ecosystem to sort of be the loudspeaker or elevate these conversations that are relevant. But at the same sense, I lost the last topic I was gonna, the second point I was gonna go. No, but definitely, I think there's this big opportunity, and we can't just sit still and we are more connected than ever. And I was just going to say, okay, I remember now. Yesterday, I was playing with Lovable. I don't know if you've tried this tool
Yeah, I
before.
did actually, and exactly yesterday I was again exploring them, how fast we move.
Oh my God, this is like, it's a game changer. We're living an era, and I think we sometimes don't see this as tangible. We're living in an era where you can say, I want to build a product, a website, a SaaS, whatever, and you can go from idea to validation to a prototype you can test in 1 day.
Hmm.
That is great. And you can do it yourself on your computer. By the way, I'm not promoting Lovable. I mean, there's a bunch of other tools, but it's just the one I stumbled on and I started testing. So I've always been, even from my experience before South Summit, I've always been playing with tech, and I like those kind of intersections of industries. But I'm thinking we're living an era where I've heard conversations where we're saying maybe in the next 2 or 3 years, we might have the first unicorn solopreneur.
Hmm.
But I'm seeing more and more companies that might have, 10 employees, 20 employees, and they're, reaching the $1 billion valuation, or they're reaching millions of customers. And I think this is the opportunity today as well, where there's also different ways to be an entrepreneur. And it's not and I'm talking about unicorns now, but that's not the only direction. I think there's a level of potential in the global ecosystem that we haven't had before. Access to tools, to knowledge, to research using ChatGPT, using AI tools that in the past you have to test it and guess and sort of see what happens. And I can go from an initial idea to something that actually works so fast. And I think this is also what excites me about the current context we were talking about. You can have entrepreneurs popping up anywhere. You don't have to be in one of these hotspots, Europe or the US or Silicon Valley. You could be in Africa, you could be in India and have an idea and learn how to use these tools and have a product that you can start selling in your market. And I think that is an amazing opportunity. I think that's also something I'm seeing with the whole AI hype. Like, we're talking a lot about the AI hype, but I think the true potential of AI is not the big, of course, there's some big scale things, but it's the possibility of using AI in farming, in medicine, in very verticalized sectors where you can actually create huge change and huge impact for people and everyone that's sort of connected to that.
100%. 100%. And I find that right now we entered this kind of very strong execution mode through united collaborations, and even more in the region and not even globally. We're just open and keen on collaboration, and the
Yeah.
competition mindset is shifting more into collaborative approach. So that's something what I also have noticed in also the more emerging countries, or countries that are just popping up right now with the startup scene, that we're finally more acting more like a unit.
Yeah, and something that is interesting with what you were just saying is I also feel startups or founders you'll find maybe in emerging ecosystems will have a much clearer picture of their purpose, of their why behind what they're building. For example, if it's an accessibility app, or
Hmm.
if it's a help to help people have a digitalized bank account, or sometimes it's basic things, but founders that live in these sort of these regions tap into these needs much better, I think, sometimes than in Europe or in the US, where sometimes founders are, how do I scale this startup? How do I get to an exit? How do I raise more funds and build my next? And it's more on this sort of, it's not all of them, but there's a lot of this sort of scale, grow, raise funds. And they spend much more time raising funds and
Hmm.
chasing VCs and going through that whole process. Where, for example, my experience in Latin America, many of the big startups I know have been bootstrapped because they don't have access to the same, even though there's obviously amazing VCs, you don't have the same sort of maturity and access as you maybe you'd have in Europe and the US. So they're just, tying things together and let's make this work and building this, coding it in their garage. And sometimes they have an idea that could be game changing if you put it in a different context. And I think that's the opportunity of this sort of collaboration between emerging markets and maybe more mature ones. And I think the opportunity as well for people in our industry, the events industry or in VCs, is help these different regions connect and creating these bridges, I think that's where the biggest opportunity of our era is sort of
Yeah,
lying and ready to get tackled.
for sure. And bootstrapping is a thing right now, actually.
Yeah.
During the last years, especially during this raising boom a few years back, I met so many founders who were just like, "Oh no, we just have to raise and no purpose, no reason for it," and you get into debts and no clear
Yeah.
understanding. Do you really need the round right now or no? But talking about events and opportunities and this whole ecosystem game, right? I've just realized that you actually joined South Summit and you moved to Madrid during the COVID time.
Exactly.
So I'm curious, how was it for you?
Well, we landed here in 2020, like early 2020, with high hopes and wow, we're moving to Europe, and we landed here in Madrid. And I remember we went out for tapas, and we're just super happy. I actually remember being on our flight over and seeing there was already some people with face masks, and the face masks was still not a thing, and we were like, I guess either they must be sick or they must have something, but this is weird. Like, why so many people using face masks? Everyone's freaking out. And we landed here. I think it was 3 or 4 days after we landed. We were at an Airbnb. Suddenly, it was announced that we would have to be locked in for 3 or 4 months. Definitely, actually, we didn't know how long it would be, and it was a crazy experience. Fortunately, I mean, we had a nice Airbnb. We had a green view. We had windows we could open,
Love it, yeah.
so we got through that. But it was also interesting to see the opportunities that came through the pandemic and talking about entrepreneurs and startups, lots of networks and communities. There was a lot of sense of, and especially for ourselves, we moved to a new country. We didn't have our friends here, our families here, or anything. And I think through these digital communities at this point, so these are communities like ADP List or at that time, it was the DLF, the Design Leadership Forum
Mhm.
from Envision. These are different communities. There was an IBM COVID challenge. And I just started getting like involved in all these different experiences in a way from going back to purpose, in a way trying to help and create solutions. There was one of these challenges. I remember we built an educations app for students and teachers and parents for K-12 that were, now they weren't going to school anymore, and they had this was suddenly a new big problem. So there was this challenge, everything ad enorm, but to build an app that would help them sort of get mentored and go through their learning progression from home, and in a way that would also allow their parents. That's just an example, but a lot of these initiatives started turning up and pop-ups and startups, and some of these communities have grown, and now they have millions of users. And I think in a way, this going back to what we were talking about, emerging ecosystems have this sort of chaotic way of operating where opportunities show up. There's problems that need to be solved, and I think COVID created that sort of space for the startup ecosystem. Yeah, the whole experience
Yeah.
was very interesting. I got to connect virtually to lots of people, many which I now consider close friends in the community, in the design community, in the startup community. So I think every situation like this has its double side and way. Obviously, there's things we didn't get to visit Madrid and we got locked in for many, but it also opened up this digital world. We were connecting with people from the US and Europe and Latin America at the same time. And in a way, it brought us together. And I think this is similar to what's happening in Europe now with the geopolitical context. In a way, the context is bringing Europe together as
Mhm.
well. And it's a bit of an analogy, but I think that's a bit of what's happening right now, where we're like, yeah, we need to move forward with a clear vision of what we want the future to be and how we can build this together.
Yeah, for sure. So, why did I say about this kind of COVID brought back us to the COVID times? The event landscape has changed as well and evolved a lot before, kind of we go it now, before and after, right?
Yeah.
It still becomes a crucial part of ecosystem growth and innovation. I'm curious
Mhm.
to learn from your experience, how do you and South Summit approach this whole strategy for designing the event program and further mission? Because there are so many things happening, so you still need somehow to identify the focus and to bring the value. So what's your standpoint when you and the team are working on this experience design?
That's a great question. And I think today my view on events is these types of tech events or startup events are not just about content anymore. They're about curation, they're about creating connections, and in a way, they're about catalyzing action, right? They're about creating, well, this year's concept for us is actually in motion, but it's about creating movement. It's about creating either an inspiration for things to happen, but also a platform for relationships. It's a place where we want people to come together and find opportunities together, create relationships, build trust, and leave with, obviously, at these events, they're very large scale. You're not going to do close a deal or close businesses there, but you leave with these opportunities to do more and to create more. In a way, I like to say, we talk about this with our team internally. You know the word serendipity, right?
Yeah, I do like
Things,
this.
or this coincidence. We like to think that we're helping design this serendipity or designing for
Mm-hmm.
serendipity
Nice.
and designing it in a way that it's intentional. So in a way that whoever is there feels that it's casual and it's like, oh, I bumped into you and hey, let's have an opportunity. But we have designed their journey through the event so that they'll meet up at either a social summit or right after a conversation or a specific lounge or in a founders meetup. So I think it's the whole event industry is evolving. Obviously, it's people, and I've heard this at events that we've gone to as well, where people are like, yeah, it's the same conversations happen on all of these events. Everyone, talking about climate is the same 5, 10 people
Uh-huh.
talking about the five similar topics. And what our challenge is as event producers or event designers as well is, how do you create conversations that are actually relevant, interesting, and different? How do you create this combination or crossing of different perspectives on these conversations that will actually be interesting for the audience? And I think this sort of goes back to also, how do we, in like the broader ecosystem, how do we understand who our attendees are? So any of these events that we can think of, they all have different target audiences. It's the same general group, but they
Mm-hmm.
focus on different groups within these. What are their different journeys? And we work a lot at South Summit in sort of designing this journey from their check-in to their keynote if they're a speaker to their networking activities, and try to think about, it's kind of like designing a video or a movie. It's not just about telling a story or talking about content, but it's about triggering emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, this year, one of the headliners I brought in specifically because I feel this is very important. Like, how do we trigger emotions through our brands, through our startups? We have Greg Hoffman. He's a former CMO of Nike, and he's going to be joining us. And he
Nice.
has a new book I think he launched, which is Emotion by Design. But exactly, this is the kind of thing we want to talk about. How do startups, how do investors, when you have a business interaction or a business exchange, it's about building trust, but it's about, you make decisions if I'm going to trust you and do business with you or raise funds with you or invest in you because of the emotions of that interaction. So the whole journey through an event, I feel, or how we're redefining tech events in a way, is it's about creating those different highs and low points and those different experiences that the attendee may feel that it's serendipity, but it's actually intentional in, we got them on one stage of talking about a certain topic with a certain headliner, then into a deep dive conversation on another stage about specific topics, then into a Q&A interactive session where
Mm-hmm.
you actually get to ask questions, and then you're in networking activity at the end of the day with people that you met throughout the day. And that sort of builds several touch points and emotional connections throughout the day or throughout the 3 days that will help you actually build these more relevant conversations. A bit of the focus that we also have this year is about growth and collaboration
Mm-hmm.
specifically. So what we want to happen this year is, we want people to go on stage or to be in the audience, see a conversation, and after that conversation has finished, we want people to talk to someone that's sitting next to you or walking out of the auditorium saying like,
Okay.
wow, this really got me thinking. This really could be a great idea, and sort of set these ideas in motion, right?
How are you gonna do it? So let's say I'm now in the audience, I'm just listening.
There's some very exciting things we're trying this year. I think similar to what we do when you're building a product, it's also test new things and experiment. Of course, we have a big social summit, which is all these different activities where people for different profiles can connect. We have tailored activities for different communities, like investors, founders for founders, deep tech. These different communities and different groups of people have their peer-to-peer knowledge exchange areas. But then we also have spaces where they get to interact. But specifically on stage, this year we're trying some very neat things. We have two specific areas where the audience is engaged with what's happening on stage. So it might feel more like a workshop if you want,
Okay.
where you'll have a fireside, a conversation starter, but then we want everyone in the audience. These might be, instead of these larger 300, 600 people stages, these will be smaller stages because you need to do this in more like a studio setting. But you get 60, 70 people in a room talking about the same thing, interacting with each other, either doing an exercise. So, for example, we might have someone, one of our ambassadors, our South Summit ambassadors is Iwo Zapad, and he's working on an AI maturity index. I don't know if you know him, but one of the activities that we thought would be interesting is what if we had a space where everyone that could go in there could sort of test their AI maturity, either for building a product, for using AI in general, for entrepreneurship. Other ideas could be having an experience where we can have prospective entrepreneurs. So maybe someone that has an idea but doesn't know how to do it. 90 minutes go from idea validation to initial prototype and help them do that together. So that's one space that we're working on, which we're calling a sandbox. And it's small, it's going to be workshops, it's going to be interactive. But then we have a special area this year, which is we're going to have a stage. We don't want to call it a stage, but it's kind of like a stage where everyone is sitting around it. And we have these very top tier conversations that you usually would see like in an arena, in a big stage, but you have in a smaller setting, more exclusive. And after each of the sessions, we're going to have a specific time for everyone that's in the audience to ask questions, but also to engage in conversations with people that are with you
Mhm.
in either sitting at the tables and lounges. So the idea is to sort of encourage more collaboration, encourage more interactions, and it's not just a one-sided experience where you have someone on the stage talking to you about something, but you can actually go back and forth, but also cross with everyone that you're sitting. You could be sitting next to an investor or a founder that could, be your next business partner, but you have no idea if you don't turn around and talk to that. So it's in a way encouraging more meaningful connections and more meaningful relationships between all of these people that are coming to our event. And of course, it's challenging. 20,000 people is not
It's
a
a
small
lot.
number.
Yeah.
But if we can get at least a few ideas to leave the summit and say, like, this is a business idea, this is a new project, this is the next unicorn, I'm going to be happy.
Oh, that's so cool. Kudos for focusing on human connection and less automation, more actually experiences, which is a difficult part to do, and to
Yeah.
balance it out between the business, content, and then experience and 20,000 people. So, what would be your so far key lessons, since I see you as a great networker, very strategic and innovative thinker who is shaping the impactful future? What are your kind of learnings so far about building meaningful and impactful relationships? Because what I've experienced that we have a lot of people that don't know how to start the conversation. They are being challenged of keeping the connection across different countries and actually nurturing. So, networking guru, what would be your
Networking Grow.
experience?
I think you need to, any of these events, so it's not just South Summit, I think for the smaller events, so we sometimes host smaller events, those tend to be easier for this networking because you get to connect much easier and bump into people. At a bigger event, so I'm talking about 15, 18, 20K plus, I think you have to do planning. And this might feel something obvious, but I mean planning in the sense of why are you coming to these events? Is it because you want to get inspired? That could be an option. Is it because you want to connect with a specific person? If you're, raising funds, or you're a startup or you're an entrepreneur, or maybe you're a service company and you're looking for clients, have clarity on why you want to come to these events, or maybe it's several of these, but understand what's your why in there. And then with that clarity, design your experience in the sense, choose what conversations you want to go to, choose what profiles or people you want to connect to, and reach out to them weeks in advance, not that same day. I think many people sort of have this thing where maybe 2 or 3 days later, they'll start sending out connection requests. And this is what usually happens. The truth is that the higher tier profiles that you actually probably want to connect to, they're going to be either preparing their stage conversation, they have their own agenda. So it's going to be really hard to have that happen. So I think plan and be very picky on where you invest your energy and your time. But also I think it's people don't come to these events to exchange business cards. I mean, you see that happening, but that's not the actual goal. What you're coming here to do is to get inspired, to connect, to even transform your thinking, your mindsets. And I think that's also, and building trust. I think something very important is if you're talking to someone you've never met before, don't just pitch your idea or your business or I feel in my experience, if I come up to someone new and I sometimes get this in my role, people that pitch they want to be on stage, for example,
Hmm.
and if it feels too pitchy or too salesy, I automatically, and I think this is a human thing, you just get, like sort of reject the situation.
Instant
It's like,
rejection. Yes, I do
yeah,
get
this is
that.
cool. Yeah, send an email. Here's a website. Apply to the speaker thing. But if you actually create a meaningful conversation, build trust, build actual genuine interest, like, wow, you're from Mike is like, oh, you're from Argentina. I was there a couple years ago. And I think this is something that Spain or Spaniards do very well, which is this relationship building where you might have a business lunch or a business meeting that 80% of that meeting will be small talk. It'll be, how are your kids?
Tapas and
How's
small
this
talk.
doing? Yeah, what's your dog doing? And like you'll talk about totally random things. Did you see the soccer game? Did you see Brazil versus Argentina last night? Or kind of like these things. And then business will actually be that last 5%, 10%, where it's like, hey, I really enjoyed talking to you. I think there's something that we can do. And I think that is also important at these networking events. To be able to create and practice, this also requires practice in how to get these conversations going. I think advice that I would give someone that maybe hasn't come to any of this is if you see someone standing on their own, you think it could be interesting, and you're in a networking space where you think it could be someone relevant, just walk up to them and say hi. And I think people sometimes underestimate the value of just saying, hi, I'm Chris. I do this. What do you do? And that just opens a conversation. Many times people are, timid or you don't want to be too pushy, and sometimes you just end up standing there or the other, you also have the other extreme where sometimes you'll find someone you really resonate with, and you might have spent an hour talking to that person. And I think it's also going back to energy management. Make sure that you're dosifying so you can actually get the biggest value of this event. If you saw a conversation you liked and you really resonated with someone on stage, try to see them off stage and see if you can have a conversation, or at least get inspired by their ideas and their perspectives a bit more. So I think great events move people, and move people. They inspire you, they get you engaged, they inspire you to take action. And I think that's sort of this sweet spot for events. If you talk to someone and you left going like, wow, I should probably think about creating this app for Gemini. Either talk to that person after the event, and that's the third point as well. Many times we connect with hundreds of people or dozens of people at these events, but then you'll probably just reach out, or they'll reach out to you to maybe 4 or 5, 10, and the event is like this big high, but after the event, things sort of flatten out until the next event or when you meet them again. So I think our industry as well is more about these different events are community touch points, if you will. It's different points throughout the year, and there's so many events now that you can connect to the same people many times. But it's important that you plan what you're doing, you're intentional about your conversations, you're mindful about your time, and you're able to create these sort of relationships and build these connections in a way that is meaningful and it's not feels just transactional.
So, to the founders who are listening to us, so you just mentioned, right? There are many events happening, a lot of noise and buzz. How can founder choose relevant event for him or her? Because yeah, it can be really overwhelming, and I do experience sometimes the debate: should I go to the physical event or not, or should I just keep building the product? Which I do believe that yeah, we can keep building the products in the basements, but we cannot do that alone. You need the movement, you need people, you need network to actually grow it and continue making the major impact. How, from your experience, someone can organize its own schedule for that?
I think it is very challenging. I think more and more it's very saturated space. There's so many events. And if you want to go, not even to all of them, but just to the major ones, you're probably traveling every month and a half. And that's crazy. And it's exhausting. And like you were saying, you have to balance, building your product, scaling your company, building your team, but also going to
Fundraising.
these events. Yeah, fundraising. You have to do so many things as a founder. And that's another conversation, which is how do you do all this juggling and balances, right? But I do feel these events are important. They're very valuable because they are the space where many of these leaders come together and the people you actually want to connect to. And you might, if you're fundraising, you might have reached out to several of these throughout the year and messaged them and you got feedback or not. You get to see them in a place, in the same place. So I think it's also embrace that opportunity as and understand that it's not a place where you're just, you're going to close a deal, you're going to raise a fund, but it's a place where also, for example, this happens a lot with a Web Summit kind of
Mm-hmm.
event. Web Summit is so massive, you don't really get to bump into people like you would in a maybe a slightly smaller event, which I tend to like more. But and you might bump into someone that's a student, or you might bump into someone that's works at a grocery store. Like it's harder to meet the right people. So I think pick your events wisely. And I know several very successful founders that I speak to, they might attend one or two events a year. They choose them, they handpick them, they do their research, and it depends on what they're going for. If they're going for visibility and amplification of their project and what they want to do, okay, that's probably one or a different event, depending on their industry, the regions they're sort of building their product in, and focus on that. If your goal is maybe raising funds, or like we were saying, or doing some other type of networking, maybe it's a different type of event. And I think we have this advantage that you have the big scale events where you have more an ecosystem centric approach, and you have smaller niche events which are also just as important and maybe even more valuable. I think you just talking to the founders that might be on the other side, it's be clear on why you want to go to this event. Again, it goes back to what we were saying, why you're going and why this event and not another one. But I think many times if you chose an event as well, what's happening within that event that will add value or that will be valuable or meaningful for where you are now and what you want to achieve. And I think lots of us working in this industry are building experiences for these different communities, these different profiles, these different types of matchmaking, reverse pitching,
Yeah.
spaces. So just find where these things are happening, get engaged. And usually one thing will lead, like once you've hit a gold nugget of it might be an investor, it might be an ecosystem builder, it might be a corporate, but someone that is in that industry you want to tap into, they'll probably let you know like, oh, there's this other event that we're also doing in that sector. And maybe that'll create sort of that catalyst effect. But I think the important thing is it goes back to intention and focus. I think we live in a world with so much noise and so many notifications and shiny object syndrome. Like you're working on a computer and you have Slack and Teams and everything is notification. And the same thing is happening in the events industry. There's conversations on every stage. There's networking events. There's 80 different events in the year. How do you choose? And I think clarity, it's focus. I was reading an article by Ray Dalio a couple of days ago, and he was talking about investment, but I think the same thing applies. He talks about meditation, but I think the same thing applies where you need to stop and think actually what you want to do, order your ideas, order your intentions, and then it's much easier to choose, go to this event, go to that. I think at some point you do have to give several of these events an opportunity and see if it matches with you and what you're going for. And then just the ones that you do resonate with and you feel are your tribe, just double down on those and go deeper because you'll start connecting to the deeper ecosystems within these networks, right?
Inspirational talk. I just want to get more in depth, like to see what's gonna happen, and I can't wait to visit
Absolutely.
myself South Summit. I think it's gonna be insanely good experience.
Absolutely. I know you've never been, so I know it's going
Yeah.
to be amazing. We're definitely going to get you on stage. So get excited if you guys know her from other conversations. You're going to get to see this on stage.
Hey.
But yeah, this year it's our flagship event is in Madrid on June 4, 5, and 6. It's a 3-day event. We have some very exciting things taking place. We're going to have Mark Randolph, the co-founder of Netflix, coming, Greg Hoffman, I mentioned, top speakers like Marcy Zaroff. We've had in the past Steve Wozniak. It's going to be very, very top tier. We're very focused on attracting investors and founders, and we're going to have lots of activities for these specific profiles and for them to match. It's taking place here in Madrid. I'll share a discount code as well with you so you can share with your community as well. For anyone
Absolutely.
that
Awesome.
is interested in joining us, you can just use that code. We also have a South Summit happening in April. So in Brazil, in Latin America, that's focused on the Latin
Ooh,
American market. That's
that's cool.
happening April 9 to 11. So in 2 weeks,
Wow.
basically, I'm traveling in a few days to Brazil already to finish wrapping up details. And then we're very likely going to have one towards the end of the year in Asia Pacific again. Last year was in South Korea. It might be South Korea again. It might be a different country. But our flagship event, and the one I'd encourage you guys are all probably in Europe, is come to Madrid, engage. And if you do come to Madrid, reach out to me or anyone in the South Summit team, and you'll find in this Spanish warmth and culture, everyone is super, super happy to help with a warm introduction, with a connection. So yeah, if you guys can make it, I'd love to welcome you and say hi.
Amazing. Where can people connect with you? I'm gonna leave the links into the show notes. What's the best
I
channel?
suggest LinkedIn for direct connection. Obviously, we have our website if you just want to see what we're doing and a bit more. If you want, I can also share a video of last year's edition to sort of see the vibe and the event. It's very, very cool.
Awesome, please
But
do.
yeah, I'd say LinkedIn is the easiest.
Amazing. Christopher, thank you so much for joining Perception Paradox and for sharing the picture of your very fun life adventure and also involvement in the startup scene. I think the audience got both what's the South Summit about your experience, what's behind this whole program and this very different approach, and what's happening within the startup ecosystem. Will be interesting to think soon. And yeah, I guess I wish you good luck with your event in Brazil and looking forward to see you and everyone who is listening, hopefully in Madrid in June. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And this was absolutely amazing. I can't wait to continue our conversations in person in June.
Likewise, thank you everyone who tuned in. Have a great day wherever you are.
Bye bye.
I'm stopping the recording.